Hey, good morning, all. Welcome to the Common Good Podcast. It's Wednesday, and on Wednesdays, we get to talk about faith. We have three of our regular faith co-host leaders with us today: Dominique Gilliard, Laura Truax, and I am Doug Pagitt in Minneapolis. And I'll tell you, it's by the way, it's May 12th today. Already moving our way through May, which, the thing old people say is, can you believe it's already May? But it does kind of feel a little bit that way. And I feel the country opening. I feel myself now fully 2 weeks and a day past my second vaccination dose of the Pfizer. I feel ready to go. And I had a magical moment. Now, Dominique and Laura, I told you that I was going to save this for until we got live here, because I have a regular habit of eating the same thing in the mornings. So I make toast. I put peanut butter on it. I put jelly on the top of the peanut butter, and then I put a fried egg on top of and I eat it with a knife and a fork. It's my own. So I do this regularly. And today, I pulled out the egg and I said, I think this is the magic egg. And it was. I cracked it open and it was a double yolked egg.
Wow.
And
there you
I
go.
smiled like a kid that just, fell into the Willy Wonka chocolate factory. It was like a 4-leaf clover of eggs, and all the mornings of consistently doing this. And sometimes when I'm at the grocery store, if I choose to look in, to make sure all the eggs aren't broken, I don't know if you do that. You open the container, peek in there.
Yeah.
I just look, is there one that's a little taller? Is there a chance there's a little twinsy egg in there? So anyway, I feel like today has full of possibility. Everything's possible today. And we're going to be talking about how, as faith leaders, we engage with other faiths, how we do interfaith dialogue, how we talk with other faiths, and all of that. So we'd love for you to tell us. So I don't know your breakfast story. If you're having a magical morning, do that in the chat. If you're watching on the live stream, and if you are just listening, send us a little note over at podcast@votecommongood.com. All right. Well, hey, good morning, Dominique.
How's it going? Yeah, my morning's not as magical as yours started off, but it's a good day to be here, be alive, dredging through finalizing taxes and everything, which roots me in the reality of this month. And yeah, feeling, looking forward to the summer coming and school getting out for my son and all that means for life. So especially as everything's in full bloom, I'm suffering the effects of the pollen and ready to enjoy some of the warmth that comes along with the suffering. So over to you, Laura.
Yeah, so Laura Truax, LaSalle Street Church. I'm actually over in Northwest Indiana today, and I would say it is magical, although a double leg, I'm kind of wondering, what is our definition of magical? It seems like a pretty low bar, Doug Pagitt. I just want to say that. But I'm in the middle of this national park, and it is bird migratory world over here. Every year, 2 weeks in May, more species of birds fly back to the northern branches of Canada or either down further south. We get more distinct bird life right now in this 2-week window than anywhere in the U.S. And that is saying a lot, and it's pretty magical out there, I would say.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's bird migration is one of these things that I never paid attention to until my birding friends, go on and on about it. And it really is something spectacular I wish I had the patience for it. It feels like birding and bird watching is something that people who can do that, man, they know how to wait, those people, and they know how to hunt. It feels like a personal discipline that people have curated that's made that possible. So when a big flock of seagulls fly over or something, then that's one thing. But boy, these people who know how to pay attention and wait and watch them come and watch them move, the intelligence in animals and in all of creation, how it communicates and flows and moves, it's really stunning, isn't it?
It is. There is this collective consciousness that's out there
Mhm.
throughout creation. Everything from, these cranes or birds that come back to nest in the very same place, to probably some of our listeners are from the coastal areas where sea turtles come back after decades away. They will come back to lay their eggs on the same beaches that they were born on. I mean,
Yeah.
that's stunning. If you move your sand on the coast of Florida, you will mess up with the nesting turtles because they won't recognize the smell or the texture or whatever it is in that sand. They'll realize that this has changed and they will no longer nest. I mean, yes, this collective wisdom of, I think Thich Nhat Hanh would call it the Stoor consciousness that's just dwelling out there throughout the natural world is remarkable, overwhelming, and you feel like you're tapping into some bedrock of God out there. Yeah.
We watched a documentary that's produced by it's on Apple Television, so Apple TV's TV apparatus, and it's called "The Year the World Changed," and it was this year of COVID. So the same people that produce, the BBC people that produce like The Magical World or whatever those are with that narrator, if you know the genre of show that they've done for decades, these people were, they attuned to the idea that the globe was going to go on a shutdown during pandemic, and they sent videographers and filmmakers out into all the places in nature to chronicle what happened. So they take a year-long look at what's happened to the planet, and I will tell you, it is remarkable how animals responded: penguins, birds, big fish and little fish in the sea, large cats, cougars and jaguars. Like the animal community of this planet was like, it's about time that everything settled down. And all the changes that happened in 1 year, the way the skies cleared, the way pollution, there's this viral video that they talk about. I don't know, I'm going on and on about this, but it fires me up. This viral video that a person shot from his rooftop in India, where for his full 30 years of his life from his rooftop, he had never seen the Himalayan mountains.
Oh, wow.
And the air clears in India, and he's like, there they are. And he shows them for the first time in 30 years, you've been able to see them. Like the planet is just aching to heal. And the human noise, the human flow, the actions on the beaches, the noise in the ocean, the noise, birds created an entirely new set of tones and notes that they were communicating, because the other notes, they only were using notes that could be heard over all the noise of car noise and human noise. And then when that quieted down, notes that people have been studying these birds communication patterns they had never heard, the birds started to use immediately as soon as the sound was gone. So I don't know, there's something about this little documentary that it's called the year the earth changed, and I'll tell you, it is worth watching. Borrow someone's Apple TV, log in, or find some way to watch it if you can. It will inspire you, and then also sort of put in you that little fear of just how much pollution and how much commotion is maybe a better word we're creating as the human race living on this planet with all the other animals. So one upside, I guess, to a year of pandemic.
Yeah, that really, as you talked, of course, we probably all were thinking of that verse in Romans, all creation groans, right? In labor pains. It's, yeah, thank you for that. That's great.
Yeah, that phrase is where all of creation groans as if in labor pains for the children of God to be revealed. I thought that same thing, and I thought all of earth is also groaning for the children of God to shush up for a little bit, like just to simmer down, right? Just give it a minute. And there it was, after 100 years of industrialization all around the planet. The creation got a year-long calm,
Yeah.
And yeah, anyway, I won't go on and on about it anymore. We'll do that on Friday on the Science Podcast. But all right, so we're going to
Nice.
talk a little bit about other faiths
Real
and
quick,
how
Doug,
as
I
Christians.
just,
Yeah, please.
as you mentioned India, I just wanted to, acknowledge the pain our brothers and sisters in India are going through right now, in regards to COVID and how it's um, decimating their country. I mean, and I've been really, really burdened by the lack of combination of infrastructure and kind of the vaccine and vaccine distribution, and what does it mean for the least of these in a context like that, to just be cannon fodder, and where is the advocacy, where is the reallocation and redistribution for places like the US who have too much, and all these different kind of things. So I think as we talk about interfaith, I think even like understanding the interconnectedness that we have with our brothers and sisters globally and not just domestically, but also understanding how the love of Christ should compel us to be intentional about understanding how the excess in our lives is connected to the lack in our neighbors' lives. And so just really sitting with kind of the weight of all of the stories and the statistics that are coming out of India, since you were just talking about India. I wanted to make sure we named that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is so important, because interfaith is also international, it's intercontinental, right? It's all the interlockings of all of this, and how one thinks about themselves in a global fill in the blank, multinational, multi-ethnic, multi-faith world that we live in. The very similar approaches are used across those. And so one of the reasons I think interfaith conversations matter is because it allows us to start to pay attention to and honor all the others on the planet who live in ways differently than we do, and to find value and to find goodness in it. And it seems to me our faith should compel us that way, and push us to that level of deeper care and deeper paying attention.
Yeah, there was a Facebook post that I don't know if it's gone viral, but I hope it does. It was just a woman recounting she was in her doing her job, whatever her job is, and needed tech support, and called this number. And it was clear after another 15, 20 minutes that they needed another person on the line. So they're there waiting on this other person to be on the line. And she just asked the tech support guy, she asked, hey, where are you? I'm trying to place your accent. And he said, oh, I live in New Delhi. And so the woman in Chicago said, wow, I've really been thinking about you guys. How's it going there? And he then goes on to recount, I have lost someone I know every day for the last 10 days. Yeah. And she said his voice broke and her voice broke. And it was that moment of realizing, yeah, we are super connected. We are, the person that another is relying on for the basic infrastructure of how they're doing their job is in the face of real tragedy here. And we're connected, yeah. Anyway, just to give a little flavor to exactly what Dominique raised. Yeah.
Yeah, and the COVID situation in India is so particularly painful because it's suffering from so many failures, right? There's their own government's failures. Like India was one of the real success stories for the first half of the COVID experience. They shut down the country within 12 hours, like of the announcement, and a full shutdown. And they were the country that others were turning to say, why was your COVID response so successful? And people who are part of that movement or part of that work in India are now saying that they started to pivot in August and September as away from it, and then basically gave up and didn't produce the infrastructure even for vaccines, which India is the largest producer of these very vaccines. So the levels at which internationally and inside their own country and the medical communities, like the failure across the global system, and I don't think India is going to be the only place that these realities are gonna play out. That not only do we need international and interfaith and intercultural work, but inside of every system, all the systems have to work, right? Like this, the idea that anything in our world and society can get along with only with sort of some version of isolationism. It's just, I think it's proven in the time that we live to be catastrophic when that when that happens. And it's so, to rectify the situation in India does take international engagement, and I'm glad the U.S. is doing that, and I know other nations are thinking about it as well. But India is not the kind of country that only has to rely on other nations, right? It's got its own struggles, and all of this is what mixes together and creates this level of human suffering, specifically around the COVID response. So it really calls us to a level of engagement that I don't know that we have all of our systems in place for.
Yeah. And I do think it's a good lead into what we're talking about today when we think about our interconnectivity, because there's always been this strain. At least I'm a child of the South. I grew up in the South. I'm a fifth generation Northern Floridian. So very much that is my worldview in growing up anyway. And I remember all these billboards, even as a child, saying, "Get us out of the UN." I remember turning to my mom and dad, "What's the problem with the UN? Why don't we like the UN?" Right? But this strong separatism that somehow in America, we may help other people, but we're not tied to other people. Do you know what I mean? Like, we go in to clean up the world's messes, but we're not joined with others. And I feel like that comes from our mindset as Americans, and it comes weirdly from at least this evangelical stream of our faith. I think it's there from the earliest American understanding of who we are as Christians here, at least in this country. We are distinct. We are different. And the outsider is to be met with suspicion, not with a sense of we are bonded, right? Yeah. So as we head into interfaith discussion, of course, there's a lot, I think, that a lot of blinders we have on. Yeah.
Yeah. So we all come at our spirituality from the Christian background. How have you, both of you, engaged in your own interfaith work or your interfaith engagements and ideas and perspectives? How have you thought about it, whether that's inside of the Abrahamic traditions or in other religious or spiritual traditions? How have you approached your own thinking about the necessity, the role, the importance of the engagement in interfaith work?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I can say for myself, I mean, again, I remember the first Catholic I ever met. I was a senior in high school, and there was that one pope who died after like 2 weeks in office. I forget who the guy was, but it was announced over our loudspeaker that the guy had died. And this girl burst into tears. And I'm thinking, that is so weird. And that was the first Catholic. I was a senior. Good grief. I was 18 years old and meeting a Catholic for the first time. I didn't meet anyone who was Jewish until I was in college, and didn't meet anyone who was Muslim until I was living in Philadelphia, and there was a mosque not too far away from my apartment. So I guess I start with that to say that I think it's quite possible that there are folks who don't believe they've ever met anyone of a different faith. And of course, now Catholic Christian, I mean, it's weird that I even saw a distinction there as a little kid, right? Or as a teenager. Now, the way I approach interfaith discussion is one of humility and richness. The more I learn about other faiths, the more I hear how people practice their faith, especially our Muslim colleagues. I think I said a few weeks ago, I don't think I have the stamina to be a Muslim. I mean, this is a full-throated life of submission to Allah that is encompassing and total. And so I feel like I become a better Christian as I'm around other folks of different faiths. Is that your experience too, you guys? Or
Yeah, I mean, so I think for me, I think most of my interfaith work really came more out of my activist work and my community development work, as opposed to explicitly kind of being moved forward by the church. And I think as I was able to grow and meld those two worlds more, then I think there started to be that more intentional connection. But a lot of work around reducing gun violence, community development, education reform, criminal justice reform, a lot of that stuff has been interfaith work. And as I have kind of engaged in seeking the peace and prosperity of our city, I have come to a very clear revelation that we can't do this in isolation. But as we, seek the common good, it means that we have to be intentional about collaborating with people who come from other faith traditions. And it is, I think, in the activist world, it was easier, and I don't think as many people had as many hangups. And then when you try to bring some folk along from Christian traditions who it's just unfamiliar, there's different questions and hangups that you have to help people work through. But I would say something that really doubled down, two things that really doubled down for me on this conversation was the first time I had the privilege, first and only time I had the privilege of going to Israel and Palestine, and really seeing interfaith manifest itself in that context. And then also kind of what that meant for us, and even some of what you were saying earlier, Laura, about, U.S. exceptionalism, being able to enter in but not bound to, and how that connects to that conversation, and the what's unfolding even right now over in that context. But then the other thing was a theological thing, because you know me, the work I do is so much located and revolved around race. There's been two scholars that have been really important for me in regards to asking questions around racialization and Christianity's connection and rootedness and indebtedness to Judaism, and really reckoning with how Willie Jennings and J. Cameron Carter really are intentional about acknowledging that, we're not the root, we're the branches. And Jay really even making the argument that the first racial problem is actually the severing of Jesus from his Jewish identity. And in doing so, making Jesus this disembodied, moralistic kind of person that we can mold in whatever image we want. And so really trying to really deeply sit with that and reckon with that, and then turn to my Jewish brothers and sisters who have this deeper well to draw from in regards to this historic knowledge, has been something that's been important for me in this conversation and my posture towards it.
Well, that's really great. I've felt this. I've had the opportunity as a pastor and somebody led a church and all that, to then be invited into the structures of how interfaith work happens in Minneapolis. And there's whole organizations that do this. And so that's been around my life. One of the things I'd longed for from the time I was really young in being a pastor was not just organizational and kind of institutionalized connection to leaders of other faith, especially specifically other faith leaders, but to try to find something more personal and personally engaging for me and for the community that I was the pastor of, to try to have people that felt like they were from other faiths. They were also part of our community, because there's something that kind of was birthed in the period of interfaith that felt a little bit like, hey, we're different, all of us, and let's not talk about our differences. Let's talk about the things we hold in common, which I'm all for, and what can we work on together, and all of that. That part of the way of being interfaith felt very accessible. The more personal side, or I wanted to have a rabbi in my life. I want to have an imam in my life. I want to have spiritual leaders, some other traditions that I know and that our community could know, so that we wouldn't only talk about the things we agree on, but to really come at it and say, you allow something, you see something, tell a story in a way, understand something about the world that I don't understand. And I really want to know our differences, because I think that's as valuable, not seeing difference as conflict, but seeing difference as this opportunity that fills in the blank spaces between us. And the unnamed spaces between us. And so I was fortunate a number of years ago to have a rabbi who was the rabbi at a large synagogue here. After he retired, he's become a personal friend and a mentor. And at the church that I was the pastor of, he became our rabbi and would come in and teach regularly. And the idea that we had a rabbi really felt great, because he would say to us, hey, here's one of the ways Christians make the world hard for Jews. Here's one of the things that for Jews in America, here's something you all do. He would raise regularly, that when you all say communion and you say that thing, on the night Jesus was betrayed, he says that constantly reminds many people, especially in the Jewish community, that you tell a story of being betrayed by Judas, which was the Greek version of the word Jew. So you were betrayed by the Jews. And when you do your communion and you use that phrase, we hear you every week or every month when you do that, relitigating a story that we're the betrayers and of the Christ that you follow. Just little insights like that have been so rewarding. And it's been harder to find that with my Muslim counterparts, for I don't know, reasons that I can't really put my finger on. Ani Zonneveld, who often listens to this, maybe she is today. She's been a really good friend in this. She runs a great organization that does that. But it's been spotty and hard to get to, and I wish that I had more of it. And I know many of the Christians that I know also wish they had more access to the faiths of these other of these counterparts that are living in our world with us in how they do their faith.
Yeah. I know that a number of years ago, maybe it was 2015, 2016, late one night, I heard this, or it wasn't a podcast, it was a radio show, and a guy from Palos Heights, which is a suburb south of Chicago, Iman was on, and he was fascinating and describing his faith community. And the next morning, I called him, and he graciously agreed to lead our church in a 1-year reading of the Quran. So about a month later, we had 52 people. We all had gotten our free sets of the Quran in 3 volumes. It was beautiful. It's accessible to anyone. You can find it online. And over the next 11 months, we met once a month for 2.5 hours. Right after church on Sunday, we'd share a meal together, and we were schooled. And it was wonderful. And it was the first time, embarrassingly, I will say, it was the first time I understood a little bit about how how close we are. The number of times that Mary, the mother of Jesus, appears in the Quran text, the number of times that these stories have this overlapping synchronicity to them, and sitting with a man and being able to connect, right, and communicate.
Wow.
It was really very beautiful, and we still had some things to work over. I mean, it was a little weird for him, as he acknowledged every time, that he was dealing with a clergy woman as opposed to a clergyman, and so we had some stuff we had to work around, but it was wonderful. And I do feel like our churches would be different, right? Our lens of the world could be so much broader if we just opened those doors, right? On both sides. I mean, his willingness to come to us was such a gift.
Wow. Laura,
but
how
they're out
much of
there.
how much of the Quran were you able to read in those 11 months?
We read the entire thing. It's not a terribly long
Really?
book. Yeah. Yeah, the sutras are very, there's, I forget the actual number. I want to say there's 117 maybe, but they're complete stories, almost like chapters of various books that are woven together is how it feels. It's a little bit like our Bible. If you were to take a chapter from all the books in our Bible, you get a little bit of the flavor, right? It's except this is written, of course, in the same voice. It's Muhammad's visions, but it some of it, like our Bible, seemed kind of crazy, like our Bible. Some of it seemed like, oh, these are beautiful. I'd love to commit these words to my heart. Some of them are the opening prayers that are said several times a day. I don't know if it's 5 times a day, but it's several times throughout the day. This particular prayer is said. It's the opening book, the opening chapter. So it's super accessible. I would recommend it to anybody, but even better to join with some other friends and reach out to the mosque down the street. And maybe the imam couldn't do it, but there's a lot of acolytes there, who are studying, and could be an easy next step to furthering what does it mean to be a believer right now in the 21st century in a connected world, right?
Wow.
Yeah.
Dominique, I've never read the Quran. I mean, I've been around bits and pieces of it, of course. Have you, Dominique? Have you had the opportunity?
Definitely not the whole thing. I have read sections of it. And one of the things that you were talking about, that voice of kind of correction and personal spurring. One of the guys in our program, the program we teach inside the prison, it's a Christian program. And one of the guys inside the program is a devout Muslim. And he holds us accountable in regards to the history and legacy and implications of what we articulate. As Christians, he calls out things that, like what you were just saying, from the Judaism perspective, that he finds as problematic and infringing upon his community. And he names the fear and the fear mongering that comes out of the church, particularly in wartime hysteria, and the way our faith gets articulated in a militaristic manner that oftentimes is against the other. And one of the easiest ways to make someone the other, or the other in a way that's acceptable to use that kind of forceful militarized language, is to cast them as the religious other and to emphasize their religious otherness. And therefore, and usually that religious otherness is also associated with otherness of pigmentation. And he really he challenges us to actually sit with the weight of that, the legacy of that, and how it continues to happen over and over and over again. And if we are going to be people who are authentic about learning from our historic mistakes. What tangible efforts are we making in the midst of these new revelations that our brothers and sisters in these interfaith dialogues are bringing up? What tangible steps are we going to take to divorce ourselves from this kind of horrid past and these anti-gospel ways of actually articulating the gospel as we try to be a transformative presence in the world? And so I very, very much love and appreciate that brother and the way in which he challenges us from outside the faith to be more faithful Christians.
Yeah. Dominique, when you were saying that, I had this memory of when 9/11 happened. My second son was in second grade, and while we tried to limit television viewing, of course, it was everywhere. Just the horror of all of that, right? But in the days that followed, as all this language around Muslims had done this, and that they were our enemy, and this is a crusade, and some of the language that was being used. My son, his name's Porter, asked me, I remember this so vividly. He said, "But Mom, Mahmoud, my friend, he's a Muslim, and he likes cucumbers on his sandwich. And we play on the playground, and he's not my enemy, is he?" And it was this stark wisdom, right, of the 8-year-old. The wisdom that comes, Mahmoud could not be my enemy because he's my friend, because he shares his sandwiches with me, and we're on the playground together. And that's what we miss, right? As we get increasingly in our own communities that look like us and go to our churches that are unrelated to other churches, even on the same street or in the same neighborhood or the same city. As we get older, our world gets increasingly small. And at this ironic time when it's actually bigger than ever. Right. And we just lack the skills to, we increasingly become diminished and degraded, is how I would say it. We're just not able to then have the skills for the task at hand, which is we live in a globalized world, and our survival is all dependent upon one another. Yeah. But
I've often wondered if our I hear you. And I've often wondered if our struggle in the Christian faith, especially in the United States, where we are in the early 21st century here, it feels like we all know that diversity is just a reality, right? No one is going to say the world is not diverse. It's not an issue of diversity per se. Diversity is not the problem. Power and dominance is the problem. So I hear a lot of Christians talk very comfortably about difference and diversity and people from different perspectives, as long as they're in charge, as long as they're the norm, as long as things stay in that power structure. And I think one of the things that September 11th did was it made the United States say to itself, we have a vulnerability. So the uptick in religious and ethnic and cultural bias came not because people looked around and said, "Oh, I didn't know there were Muslims in America, and I didn't know that there was struggles of international struggles of faith and radicalization and so on." People knew all that. We all knew that. We just didn't think it was going to impact life here. Yes. And this is one of the places where Christians really struggle in interfaith dialogues, right, is getting oneself, and part of the 20th and 21st century narrative of Christianity is that it's the dominant religion, especially in North America, and then even believing it's dominant around the world, right? When you export it, you export Christianity as like the solution, not the vulnerable expression. And it really is this part of our American narrative and our Christian narrative to want to avoid being dominated and to want to avoid something else having the power that we believe rightly belongs where we are. And I think that's the issue that really explains so much of what goes on in the rise of Christian nationalism that's gone on in this new expression in the last 20 years, which really threatens Christianity and our nation and the world, is that it's really a narrative that wants to say that the power still needs to remain where it is. Diversity is great as long as the power systems stay aligning the power where the power, quote, rightly belongs.
Right.
Yeah, I think we have yet to really reckon with the role of fear in the distortion of our witness. I think from everything from this interfaith conversation to race conversation to conversations about patriarchy to like all of this stuff that goes on the slippery slope kind of thing. There is this intentional articulation that if we give an inch, they're going to take the whole thing. Forget the mile, the whole thing. And as if it's ours, quote unquote, to give. Like if we give it in, like, and that's the posture problem. Like we come in and we intentionally use this kind of very inflammatory language to try to cast ourselves as the center and others as the other. And as long as we centralize, like you said, power and contain power, but also, you know, one of the real things that I've just been wrestling with is just how I'd say, you know, more conservative expressions of faith have really kind of won the whole narrative war over what is political and what's not. And how when we mobilize around things like, you know, religious freedoms, which you would think in a multi-nation, multi-world, religious freedoms would mean something very different than what most people who mobilize around them actually mean when they're talking about religious freedoms. But it's all, the mobilization is all rooted in fear. It is rooted in these other foreign people who don't belong, who this isn't truly, they're not truly part of us, or coming to destroy our way of life. And the only way for us to sustain who we are and who we're called to be as a Christian nation is to mobilize against the enemy. And so you use this militaristic language, you use this conquering language, and you turn back to scripture and you try to proof text things in ways that actually legitimate what it is that you're advocating for. But it's all concealing what you're talking about, Doug, with this kind of this conspiracy really to sustain and retain power. And I think we really have to start to name the fear mongering and the way it is a theological misappropriation that really leads us into this faulty witness, and it's a theological malpractice. And I think we have to really reckon with it as we try to become more faithful followers of Christ.
But what a tall mountain to climb, Dominique, right? Honestly, what a tall mountain to climb. Because at the heart of our faith, the central defining moment of our faith, right, is a God who hangs on a cross, who literally gives himself over in an effort, in humility, in love, in invitation. It's anything but domination and power over. It is almost wincing in its weakness, right? And the early church so understood that. They understood, how in the H can this be God hanging there? Because the whole narratives of God is ready to smite you. And now God's in God's holy temple and he's hanging on a cross. We have not really wrestled with that in our own lives. We still think that somehow we're Christians the more we can beat people over the head with Bible verses and make them into numbers that are, soul saved. when the fundamental posture of our life is to be one of holy humility. So somebody, I forget who it was who said this, that the greatest challenge Christianity has are American Christians. And that really resonates with me. We're the greatest entanglement to the church. It's like that great scene in the Brothers Karamazov. Do y'all know that scene? It's the Grand Inquisitor scene where, okay, your quizzical looks great. This is great. Can I do a quick discursus on this? Okay. Jesus comes again in Russia in the 1880s, and he's walking around doing some miracles, and the poor people love him, and people are kind of crowding to see him and to experience him. And the Grand Inquisitor, the central leader of the church, says, okay, well, this is not happening. He imprisons Jesus, where he then that evening, late in the night, comes in to ask him, is it really you? And Jesus does not respond. And so the Inquisitor keeps on like, you don't understand. We have got a system set up here. We are keeping society together. We are holding it all up. It is all on our backs. And I'm not about to have you interfering with that. I'm not about to have you upset this structure that we've got here. Because the reality is that we're out here doing the work, and you can't just pop in and give this entire group here hope, or you can't give them autonomy. You cannot give them power. This is not going to happen. I'm going to forbid you. And Jesus still continues to sit there. The Grand Inquisitor sits there, and eventually Jesus stands up and kisses the man's lips. And the Grand Inquisitor leaves. He tells him, I'm not going to kill you. Leave town. Don't ever come back. And that's the close of the scene. Yeah. So, I mean, talk about people who do not want to relinquish power and who would find actually the good news of the gospel incredibly threatening, right? It would be deeply, this is what we're seeing, and it's couched in all sorts of other stuff, but it's destabilizing. Okay.
That is so good. That is so good. And look, I mean, I feel like there's these non-identical repetition patterns that we experience as humanity, because the critique of American Christianity in the 21st century is spot on. It really matches or has a similar rhythm to that which was going on even in the earliest days of Christianity, right? You sort of imagine the church in Philippi, where the book of Philippians was written to the people in Philippi, and that very famous section that people talk about, Philippians chapter 2, for those that like chapter and verse, literally, it reads, therefore, if you have any encouragement from being united with Christ, if any comfort from Christ's love, if any common sharing in the Spirit, if any tenderness and compassion, then the writer says, then make my joy complete by being like-minded and having the same love, being in one spirit and mind. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourself, not looking to your own interests, but also to the interests of others. In your relationships with one another, have the same mindset, the mind that's in Christ. And then it goes into this poem, this beautiful poem that was around in the first century. So you feel in the earliest narratives, in the earliest texts, this struggle for vanity, this struggle for power over, this struggle for putting one group's or one person's set of interests in front of another person's set of interests. And that wash, rinse, repeat narrative has been going on and on and on. So what we struggle with is not just, it's not I think I've used this metaphor before because I heard it in a TED Talk. It's not the kind of thing that would be reminiscent of having your tonsils removed. It's more like your oral hygiene, that you have to regularly be someone who is keeping up, and every generation and every community and every place has to say, these are These are annual, besetting, repeating narratives that show up, and we have to tend to them like you want to brush your teeth regularly, not just say, hey, I brushed my teeth when I was 5, so I got that taken care of. You want to approach this in a way that's going to recognize the real human dilemma, and that deep call to like have the mind of Christ and not be so selfish and focused and power over, but rather, being in the very nature of God, considered equality with God nothing to be grasped, but emptied himself in the full, like emptying oneself is the call of Christ. So that thing just shows up over and over and over as this real narrative. And I think the interfaith conversations and all of our interlocking conversations and interlocking relationships require us to not care about yourself, but to not care about yourself at the cost of the other. And that's a kind of maturity that I don't know, I think we all long for, that sort of sits at the heart of it. And I think it's one of the benefits of all spirituality, because I don't know if I can speak for every spiritual tradition, but it feels to me like most all of them are calling for some version of this, right? You get into every spiritual tradition and it says, hey, one another, love your neighbor as yourself, some version of that. Don't approach the world with vanity and with selfish ambition, but having this same mind of Christ, that to live as if you have the same mind of Christ and approach the world in similar ways.
Yeah.
But and that's where I think some of the challenge comes in for a faction of the church. We don't see folks in regards to interreligious interactions as our neighbors. We see them as suspicious. We see them as other. We see them as a threat to convert us, or as competition for people that we quote unquote desire to convert. And, I've said this over and over again. One of the real problems with the church in the U.S. is we have misread scripture. It doesn't tell us to go and make converts. The Great Commission says to go and make disciples who make disciples. There's a difference between seeing people as conversion projects and seeing people as people that you want to invite into the family of God as co-laborers and disciples who are going to submit their lives to Jesus. And so I think this whole notion of suspicion and the fear of what somebody of a different faith might do creates this posture that prohibits us from taking on the mindset of Christ and engaging in the world in that way. And I think that there is really this real fear. I think most of us who don't live in these faith communities that articulate fear in this manner, I think we can underestimate how palpable the fear actually is for a lot of folk, and how much it drives their interaction and engagement and worldview. And when that stuff goes unbridled, then we start to see our faith as something that needs defending. And we start engaging these culture wars and trying to defend the Bible. And when you take that militaristic posture of defense, the mindset of Christ is not going to be what is expressed and exuded through how you engage in the world. And so I think, one of the challenges for the church right now is, how do we start to think about relationships differently? I think for a significant segment of the church, they think about entering into a relationship with the intention of conversion. But we don't think about entering into a relationship for the enrichment of myself as a person, my soul, my spirituality, with people who hold different political, religious worldviews, cultures, all these different things, and just to enter in for relationship's sake. And so that lack of proximity with people who are different, and we know that they're different, and our purpose of entering into a relationship with them is to not to transform them, but to actually just be in relationship with them. And if there's something so attractive and effective about our lives that they see through us through relationship and they want to pursue, or they become open to understanding more of who God is, then yes, great. Let's talk about that, and let's bring them into the family of God. But that's not the reason why we enter in. And so I think if we don't have a different way of engaging, then we're never going to have this common understanding of humanity and this common connectivity that Laura so beautifully articulated with her son. Like, we're not going to have that point of connection and say, well, what about my friend? Because we don't have friends from this context. And then it's so easy to believe the narrative, the propaganda what's being said, because we don't have anything to counteract that with. And so I think a lot of what we see and how easily some factions of our nation as a whole and the body of Christ are moved by some of this fear-based propaganda, it manifests the fact that we're not in relationship with anybody from those contexts. And so it's so easy for us to actually buy into what's being articulated and the fear that's being sold.
Yeah, right on.
Yeah,
That's
Dominique, that reminds me, I so well said. And it reminds me of the story. Back in the 1980s, there was a big push to care for people who were starving around the world, and lots of efforts to try to connect people in the United States with the food suffering, those suffering from food shortages around the world. And I was at a presentation where a person said, something like, how many of you believe that there's people starving around the world? And people raised their hand. And then the person said, okay, who can name one? Can you put a name
right
on
on.
any of those people?
There you go. There you go.
And then ultimately what they were doing was connecting people to a sponsorship program where they would know a child and help the child. Right. So they had a solution in mind. But this question of wanting to make personal the people that you so I was trying to say to someone, like, of course you want to help, but because you have no personal connection, that's part of this lacking. And your story there, or your articulation of, we enter into relationships because we want to have some sort of contribution to that person, is really different than starting with the people that you know. And that's been one of the struggles, for a lot of us in interfaith work, is that sometimes the only pathways to interfaith connection is to work on a problem together. And as positive as all that can be, like, look, I want us to give food to people, whether you know their names or not, but there's something about a human being being motivated out of true relationship with someone that is, I think, essential to the ultimate movements of us going forward. And you would hope, sort of imagine that in a world where that kind of interconnectivity is so much more available than at other times in our human experience, that you really could know and connect with people. Even with all that technological opportunity, it still doesn't happen very often. Still really comes down to a willingness of people to find those relationships and to engage in them.
So I want to step into Stephanie's usual role right now and kind of highlight some of our listeners' comments. And so Greg Wood said, faith looks better if we look up to others instead of looking down on them.
Wow.
And Tiffany Baker says, I was literally taught that I should not be friends with people who did not belong to my church, not by my parents, but by the church we went to. And so people are resonating and vibing with kind of the fear and the othering and the way in which it orients us in a way that prohibits us from living into what Scripture calls us to in Philippians 2 and taking on that mindset of Christ.
Yeah.
Well,
good talk, you guys. Word? Good talk.
Yeah, Laura, you look like you had a final word.
Well, it comes from Jimmy Carter, and it's a word that I heard when he was one of his earlier books. he was talking about living in Plains, Georgia, and how he was blasted in office for these different programs that he was promoting. And he said, when was the last time any one of you guys had a hungry person to your table for dinner?
Mm.
And that has really resonated with me over the decades. And I think this is where it gets to, right?
Yep.
When was the last time you ever had fill in the blank over for dinner? Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah. That's really great. Hey, one of the projects that Vote Common Good and Greater Things are going to be endeavoring into in 2021 this fall is this work around the issues of refugees, asylum seekers, and immigration. We're doing a project we call We the People, and it includes a bike ride, not only from San Diego over to St. Augustine, Florida, along the southern border of the United States and the northern border of Canada, northern border of Mexico. We are we do have a northern border of the United States. I live in that state, which is a border community. But the southern border of the United States and the northern border of Mexico, we're going to be riding a 3,200 mile trek from there. You're welcome to join in a day or two or a week or all 65 days if you'd like. But we're also going to be hosting community bike rides for people to be connected to refugees, asylum seekers, and immigrants in your own towns and your own communities. It's a way for us to put a name and to tell the stories. Around here, we try to be a storytelling movement, and we want to tell the story of our faith and story of our politics, the story of our common goodery in our civic life, but also the story of the people that make us we the people in this country. And so that's what this effort is about. It's a border community and a border and communities and virtual bike rides. You can find all of it over at wethepeople.org or wethepeopleride.org or at votecommongood.com. You can find all that information there. Get on our email list too, and we'll keep you up on this. We'd love for all of you who are listening to consider hosting a bike ride. Maybe it's 2 people, maybe it's 200 people that you get together to do some kind of a ride to raise awareness around the stories of the people that live right in your town. And we connect all of those rides together and stories together with those around the country and those of us who are traveling from coast to coast to tell a much larger story of who we are and where we find ourselves in this community. Because it's really hard to love your neighbor when they stay nameless. So we'd like to put some names and faces and people into these stories that we talk about, because you only get so much compassion when you're talking policy. Compassion tends to come personally. And so if you put the reality of, as Laura said it so brilliantly from her son's perspective, my friend on the playground who likes cucumbers on his sandwiches. That's a different way to think about the world. And that's what we want to do by getting you on a bicycle and get outside. September 10th to November 14th is the period of time that we're going to be doing this. So somewhere in that 65 days, we'd love for you to consider hosting a bike ride on one of those 9 weekends that fall over that week, over that period. So thanks so much for being a part of things today. We'll be back tomorrow. We talk issues. On Friday, we talk politics, we talk science and economics. On Tuesdays, we talk politics. Monday, news. And of course, on this Wednesday is our faith day. So good to have you all along. Laura, Dominique, and Stephanie has the week off this week and next week with lots of stuff going on in her own life right now. So she'll be back in a couple of weeks. And so Dominique, Laura, good to see you. Thanks all for listening. And we will talk to you tomorrow.